This is part 2. I left off the last video talking about check-in. So there's a 5-minute, a 10-minute, and a 15-minute, and then you just keep repeating the 15-minute check-in. So what I was saying was, I feel like I just kind of trusted my mom intuition on this. Sometimes I'm like, he just sounds so worked up. I knew he wouldn't want to go to sleep, so I would go in and soothe him. Or other times, it's like, yeah, it's at a 10-minute check-in, but I feel like he's literally about to pass out. And if I go in there, it's going to escalate him more. And so I know some people are really by the book when it comes to sleep training, but I just felt like my baby's not a robot. And I also have to do something that serves me and him. So more than trying to keep all the rules and like do it exactly how they say, I wanted to do it where I felt good about it and I knew my baby was okay. And something that I could sustain that worked for me. So I wouldn't say that I have all the answers. I know I don't. And I also would say this video probably isn't for you if you're wanting like a regimented, like this is the way to do it. Okay, so I was saying I would let him go a little bit past. And it after the first day, so I told you that first day it was like 35 minutes of pain, but then he finally fell asleep. And then I accidentally put him down too early for his third nap, and then he cried for an hour, and it was horrible, and his eyes were swollen, and it was like the worst thing ever. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is horrible. I hate it so much. And my husband is like, okay, we have to give it more than a day. And then that night, he fell asleep within like 5 minutes flat. And then the next day, it was like, oh my gosh, 7 minutes, 6 minutes. He's putting himself to sleep and his cries aren't even that hard. So it just felt like, thank God, it just felt like he got it really quickly. And because he learned to fall asleep on his own instead of on me or on the boob or being rocked or bounced or to music, he started connecting his sleep at night better and he started napping longer. So he was only doing these like 30-minute naps and waking up every sleep cycle and crying, and I'd have to go back in there and put him back to sleep. And it was just this whole thing where it disrupted. It was just so much. It was so much for everyone and for my family. It was hectic. But it was fine. I did it for 5 months. That's what we did. But anyways, he learned to fall asleep without me. So then when he would wake up after a sleep cycle, he could put himself back to sleep. And that was the other thing. It was hard. But if he would wake up after 30 or 40 minutes, I'd set a timer and I would wait to check on him for like 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how I felt he was doing. And that helped him connect his sleep. So then he's now giving me good like hour and a half, 2-hour naps. There's just so much information on all this. I'm just gonna share what worked for me. I feel like there's other things that work really well for other moms or other babies. And I have different stories for my other 2 babies, but with this particular baby, that helped. And also it was in the middle of the night. I'm like, okay, what do I do if he wakes up? And my friend gave me the advice to set a timer and just wake them up at 10 and 2 to nurse them. And that worked a bit, but then I felt like he was still waking up. Like I'd nurse him at 10 and then he'd still wake up at 12 and he'd be crying. So it was kind of this margin of error to be like, okay, I'm going to set a timer, or I'm not going to go in there for 10 minutes. If he falls back to sleep, then I'm going to let him sleep. And if not, I'm going to go nurse him. Some moms just stick with it and they're like, oh, my baby cried for 45 minutes in the middle of the night, but then they went back to sleep. I don't know. I just didn't want him to cry that long for the whole family, and even for my own sanity, I just couldn't do it. And so pretty much if he cried longer than 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, he's hungry, I'm just gonna go nurse him. And so I still wake up probably 2 times, sometimes 3 times a night, but it works for me. And I want to know that my baby isn't super hungry, and I don't know, I'm just a little bit not as regimented. But for me, this feels like a huge win because I was waking up 7 or 8 times a night, and he's sleeping in his own room, in his own crib. So I'm like, you know what, if he wants milk twice a night, that's what he gets right now. He's still only 6 months. So those are essentially that's like the sleep training process that I did. And then when we moved him to his own room, we kind of had to redo some of it a little bit because he wasn't used to sleeping in there. So I just feel like you have to be a little bit like free flowing with like, okay, we might have to restart. And I also did it wrong in terms of, they say to give it a few weeks before you mess with their naps at all. And my little girl started preschool, so I didn't have the luxury of being on time exactly for his nap. So he started falling asleep in the car, and then I'd have to try to transfer him, and then he was waking up and crying. So like I said, there was a little bit of like, whoo, this is not as smooth as that first week where it was like, he's falling asleep every nap under 10 minutes. This is amazing. But I still feel like it's what we needed to do. And it was a huge win because I'm sleeping through the night. He's sleeping through the night. He's taking longer naps. He's able to fall asleep without me. I also think a huge part of this was spacing out his feeds. So before I did all this, I was just nursing on demand all the time, which looked like probably every 2 hours. And once he started sleeping better and I spaced out his feeds to 3 hours, he just seemed more settled. Like he seemed like I knew he was full. I wasn't wondering if that's why he was crying. I felt like it gave me peace of mind. It also was nice not having to nurse so long. So I know every baby is different. And like I said, I have different stories for my other two, but this worked well for me. So, okay, that's sleep training with Gyra. I'm sure that you guys have tons of questions like I did, and I'm trying to think of ones that I had. I think the question of like, what do I do if he wakes up in the middle of the night? I used to like jump up to get him, like my adrenaline, right? And it's like, you just want to grab your baby as soon as they whimper. But it helped me being like, okay, he gets 10 minutes to resettle himself. I'm not going to get him for 10 minutes. And almost every time he would just put himself back to sleep, which it just helped him sleep better at night. Okay, so I think that is the end of this video. And okay, let me talk a little bit about my daughter. This is the last thing I'll say. So Journey, I called her my dream baby. She was such a good sleeper. I knew with her I didn't want to co-sleep because I just got done co-sleeping with my son for 3 years. I literally just got him out of our bed like a month before she came. So I was not ready to co-sleep for 3 more years. And so from the time that she was really little, I always put her in her bassinet, especially at that 6-week mark. I would put her in her bassinet awake, which I never did with my son. And honestly, I kind of forgot to do with Gyra because it'd been 4 years since I'd had a baby. I was like, what did I do? In a lot of ways, he kind of felt like a newbie. I knew like I was starting all over. But with Journey, I put her in her bassinet awake, and she would be sleepy or she'd be awake, but from the time she was really little. And because I did that, and because I would lay her down when she was awake and kind of like let her drift off to sleep on her own, I never officially sleep trained her. She just loved her bassinet and then loved her crib. And there were times when it was like, okay, I let her fuss a little bit, but I never had to be like, set a timer, I'm not going in there for this long, do the check-ins. It just was way easier. So if you're watching this video before your baby is older, I would highly, highly recommend just laying them down in their bassinet and letting them drift off to sleep when they're little. If your baby will do it. Like I said, I know every baby's different, but with my girl, that was like, oh my gosh, it was so amazing to know that like she felt safe in her crib, she was comfortable, and she wasn't always so dependent on me getting her to sleep. And I would get her really sleepy, like I'd bounce her until her eyes were heavy and I'd lay her in there, but she was really little when I started doing that. Okay, so that's the end of my video. If you guys have questions, let me know. I'm also gonna follow up this video with another one. I wanna talk about postpartum recovery, specifically like those first 2 to 3 weeks, because I feel like I have some really good advice for resting and enjoying those first 2 weeks with your baby. Okay, bye.